Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I have somebody really special with me. We, as a think tank, have been consulting with governments. We have been consulting with hotel industry, travel industry, just trying to figure out that what the future recovery in travel and tourism industry can look like. But there is a lot of noise. There is a lot of emotion. And today's guest is specifically been brought here because we want to cut through that noise. We want to have some data-based, fact-driven discussion and arguments that how the different phases of recovery could look like, specifically in the region of Middle East. So my guest today is Hala Matar, President, Middle East, Africa, and South Asia for HVS. It's an advisory, financial advisory, and to a hospitality intelligence organization. And Hala, welcome to our platform. Tell us about it.
Thank you, Sumaira, for having me.
Tell us.
Thank you. So as you described rightly, HVS is a financial advisory hospitality company, and we have focused our time and resources since 1980 across the world, advising and working with hotel owners and lenders to determine the sustainable strategy for the development of tourism and specifically hospitality assets. Personally, I've been with the firm for 16 years, and I've started off in London before moving to set up our Shanghai operation, and I landed in Dubai in 2007 and set up the Middle East operation, and then overlooking expansion into Africa, but South Asia as well. And again, over and over, I have seen a number of factors that have impacted the industry, and we have seen recessions, and I've also been given this opportunity to actually work in markets that are very well established like Europe, but less developing cities, whether it's in the Middle East or Asia. So I've seen the cycles. One thing we can all agree on is that this is beyond what is happening today, is beyond market cycles, but also what is interesting to observe is because of the different market cycles, how are we likely to recover? Are we going to require the same time, the same investment, the same support? So by looking at the globe, we're obviously in comparison, we have the same challenge, and we're expecting recovery to take pretty much as long. Some will be luckier, and we can discuss this more during the interview this afternoon. But otherwise, it is bringing in the different from the different angles of the world and looking as to why tourism is important and how in the last couple of years tourism has really become a key focus for many cities in the Middle East.
Thank you. Hala, so you've covered a wide spectrum of countries before you landed in Middle East. So your lens, is also very much integrated into that region. So I'm really interested to deep dive with you. I've just seen a very bleak report from Dubai Chamber of Commerce, on the Dubai business community and the risk of businesses going out of business. And travel and sits right up there. They're saying there's a high risk of within the next 1 month, 74% of travel and tourism businesses could go out of business. So tell us about it. I know that you have also conducted a lot of surveys. There have been some recent hotel reports that have been generated. And what is your data telling you? What is your data forecasting that how bleak or how bad this situation could get before it gets better?
Sure, definitely. I'm happy to share with you our observations and findings and also my personal opinion on the forms of recovery for this market. But if you allow me, just before we dive into our current problem, I just want to also take time to assess and reflect on what we have done over the last 10 years. Because as we said earlier on, the Middle East naturally was a market that was looking to develop further its tourism infrastructure. And we have been very successful in certain cities. And this is attributable to the cities themselves and the government, but also to the airline business that has been a key driver. So whether we look at the Emirates or Etihad or Qatar Airways, they have really been driving traffic into this region. And I think, when we talk about currently the hospitality, it is every other sector of this hospitality that has been challenged. But what I wanted to say is that over the last 10 years, we have seen tremendous growth. We have seen that some markets are now considered to be mature, and there are even transactions in those markets, and others that were setting out their vision, and the likes of Saudi Arabia that has huge potential to grow. I mean, yes, there is tourism in Saudi Arabia, but so far it has been local tourism, and now they're opening up to the world. What is important, however, to realize is that over the last 10 years, we've created the infrastructure. We've built, we've eased off visa restrictions, we've looked at the different segments, we've analyzed the different segments, we've looked at behavior, travel patterns. So that a lot of this will allow us and support us in our recovery road. But today, what has happened is beyond us and will obviously impact the future. So we have to pause and we have to actually reevaluate what we have learned. And for that reason, as you rightly said, we have gone out to speak in the current crisis with hotel owners, with investors, with travelers, and those are the frequent travelers, and those that typically stayed in hotels almost every week, shuttling between different cities or going for business
travelers.
And we wanted to really understand, at least as we speak today, how do they feel about traveling again? And when they travel, what will they travel for? On one hand, and more importantly, having a dialogue with hotel owners. And I'm happy to share more of these findings with you during our interview today.
Fantastic. So there is an issue, an underlying issue in Middle East. By some estimates, there is an oversupply already. And some of these issues existed pre-COVID, and now with COVID happening, how is that impacting? What is your message to the governments in the Middle East? How can they combat, because in the developed world, in most of where I'm sitting in Canada today, the governments have been instrumental. The role of the governments has become even more evident and strong, in the COVID, because there are subsidies, there are, tax reliefs, there are waivers, there are all kind of schemes today to support small businesses as well as large businesses. So what is your message? What is your data showing you, which is so compelling that your message to the governments is to act or not to act, or to just ride the wave?
Right. I mean, let's take the different issues here and try to address them. When I did my valuation index at the end of 2019, we've looked at how the hotel values have changed over the last 10 years in the region. And we were looking at a minus 30 or a decline of 30% in hotel values. And one of the reasons, or a number of reasons, but predominantly it is the oversupply situation that has been putting pressure on rate, and as a result, RevPAR has declining. It is important, however, to say that we observed increased visitation year on year. So there wasn't a decline in the number of visitors. On the contrary, this continued to grow, but also the growth in the number of hotels and the offering and the competition and Airbnb, this has put pressure on rate. More importantly, what we have seen also in the last 5 years specifically is that the cost of business and the indirect taxes have increased the operational cost, and therefore the GOPs and the EBITDA's margins have been reduced, resulting in a declining value. And we have also worked with owners that were already having challenges meeting their debt obligations. So we actually, and personally, I've said, I feel the government should step in to work out demand and supply relationship and ensure that, yes, we have a healthy offering, but we're not cannibalizing, but also to ease off and support with some of these additional expenses that hotel owners have to incur.
So that's a key message, right? That's a key message coming from an organization like yourself. You're not a hotel owner or operator, or you don't run as a PC or a DMC. You're coming purely from your data, from your numbers, and what they are showing you. And it's really...
Yeah, that's totally independent, Sumaira, because actually, when I work on portfolio valuations, whether these assets sit in the Middle East or Europe or the US, now we understand the tax system, right? And we looking at buying an asset in London, you typically expect to pay around 30% in taxes. or that this is part of what you would build into your P&L. But what we have seen, for instance, with assets that are transacting in this part of the world, that there are indirect taxes that are almost the equivalent of what you would typically expect to pay in Europe. And these are the sort of concerns that we've had. If we're not able to increase the top line, is there anything we can do to reduce the expenses in order to safeguard the EBITDAs and the hotel values so that it continues to be attractive moving forward? Now, with COVID, what that means is that at the moment, we may have actually walked into 2020 with many of the hotel owners already lower cash reserve, because what they've been having to do to service their debt is to use some of their cash reserves or put their hands in their pockets. At the moment, there has been a number of announcements and the governments have been supportive. The question is to what extent, and is that enough? My guess is that even those hotels that today have decided to close doors, their running cost, even when closed, is large, and they're actually having to fund it from their own reserves. If in a couple of months they're ready to open, the question is, are they going to be able to open again? Do they have enough funds in place? What can the government do more at the moment to help and support, specifically, perhaps not the larger groups? In a recent survey that we have done, that we spoke specifically with hotel owners, and this is not yet available online, but will become available online, but I'm happy to share the preliminary findings with you, Sumaira.
Okay.
80% of hotels in the GCC, and I'd like to focus on the GCC so we're not generalizing. 80% of the hotels in the GCC owned by the pool of owners we have spoken to are currently closed. The remaining 20% are either fully operational, and predominantly these are resorts.
Just to interject for our international viewers, GCC is Gulf Cooperative Council. And it's also very important to mention here just that a lot of these hotels have their staffing are immigrants, right? They come from overseas.
That's right.
Because some of the viewers may be wondering about the operating costs, that where are these operating costs coming and how to curtail them. So it's not just brick and mortar operating costs we are talking about, it's the human capital, which is
Absolutely
essential for these hotels. One of the biggest employers, mass employers, are hotel industry. And in the GCC countries, that's a big challenge because most of this workforce is coming from overseas,
Which makes it truly much more complicated, because when these hotel owners are having to make the decision to close down and they're closing down, they still have to look after their staff until that day they either reopen or they can put them on a flight back. And with the travel restrictions in place and the airports not being operational, this is a running cost that they will have to continue incurring until they make sure that they are back home safe. Whereas elsewhere, you potentially argue that these people may be able to go back to families. Oftentimes, they are living out here alone, on their own, which is a bigger responsibility. So that's obviously a large portion of the running expenses, but also other expenses, be it the utilities that potentially one could argue if the government could waive that, because this is a large cost as well, and many other fixed expenses. So this is the challenge. At the moment, we have 80% of hotels that have closed down. Some will reopen. My personal view, potentially 65% will open, but a number of owners will opt not to open as yet, because the cost of reopening and ensuring that you are adhering to the guidelines and the requirements is quite high. And you definitely need to have access to the funds required in order to be able
funds not from the government, obviously.
Yeah, funds from the government or your cash reserves. And the question is how much cash reserve is there? And that is obviously case by case. But generally speaking, we've asked that same question to the hotel owners in our survey. And the majority of the respondents, so that would be around 60 to 70% of the respondents, said they could meet up to 6 months. The question is up to 6 months. So anywhere between 3 months to 6 months. So up to 6 months. Beyond that point, this is going to be another serious challenge. And therefore, what can we do to support them today? But not only, my view is it's not going to be only for the next 6 months. What I'd like to stress here is that this is beyond just dealing with the current situation and the status quo and the immediate. Now, naturally, back in February, March, and April, all of us, all of our minds, the governments, they wanted to deal with it as it happened, and they wanted to make sure there's no loss to life. But now, anything we do with businesses has to be much more strategic.
Right.
Has to look for a longer time frame.
Right. So, so I think the problem, what I see is not 2020. Somehow people will ride 2020 through. It's really beyond 2020. We are looking at 2021 and 22. How do these products survive? How these hotels or tour operators or airlines. Okay, that's very interesting. But Hala.
So Meira, on this one for 2020, I mean, just to put things in context, when we look at our forecast for the GCC region versus Europe's forecast or our offices in the US, the way they're looking at recovery in the US, Canada, Hong Kong, Japan, and elsewhere in Asia, we are looking at somewhere between the decline in RevPARs between -40 to -60. For the GCC, it's -49, but elsewhere we are looking at around the same. So again, this is a global problem. Right. And certain markets, and we can discuss more about the segmentation and how that may or may not help the recovery. But as you said, 2020 is a serious challenge. And frankly, I think everyone now is just focused on riding it until the end and worrying about 2021. A lot of companies, unfortunately, may not be able to survive that long.
Right. And my next question was that what regions do you see the recovering first in the geographies that you're operating in? But it seems like from what you've already told me that we're really, really in this thing together. This crisis, there's a symbiotic link between all of the countries. So it doesn't matter if one country is on the path to recovery before the other. But if like you said, UK is not ready to move, allow its people to travel, that has a direct impact on the readiness in the Gulf region, in the GCC countries, or Germany for that matter, or from China.
Right. Yeah. No, naturally, there is a global loss, and we are very dependent. And again, in the last 10 years, connectivity has improved drastically, allowing people to travel across the world. But with that said, there are markets that will recover by having access or take advantage of domestic tourism and local tourism. So it's no surprise if China was to recover faster, if the US was to recover faster, but also if the UK, because a lot of British used to leave England in the summer, and now they're all going to stay in. However, the question is the local market enough to cover for the loss? Globally, there is an expectation that around 50 to 60% decline in travelers, and that will have a serious impact on eventually hotel performance and the financial impact.
Right. And what about Hala? Do you foresee that because the domestic market, how much can you ramp up? Because the word domestic does not apply to the region in the common sense that the world is used to, because a lot of our travel for that part of the world is really from other countries. So whilst the UK or the European countries, your traditional markets like China, Russia, Europe, they are still bracing themselves up and are encouraging their citizens to stay and travel domestically. What about some regional corridors? Do you foresee something like that, the tourism corridors or bubbles being created in, let's say, between Saudi and UAE, so UAE and India, UAE and Iran, UAE? This is used to be the traditional travelers to Dubai, Iran, India, Pakistan, and these are like big populations, right? Do you think these are the sort of feeder markets that we need in the short term? We will be that UAE or the GCC countries will have to rely on?
I definitely believe there will be an improved inter-region travel, and that specifically that relates to the GCC again. I'm more concerned about travel recovery from places that you've just mentioned, be it India or Iran, and for a number of reasons. More so because of also the different stages in the containment of COVID.
Right.
One of the questions and one of the key factors for or key decision-making factor for traveling when we ask frequent traveler is how did the government handle this whole pandemic? How efficient were they perceived to be? And this will play a key factor. And to the advantage of places like Saudi or the UAE, this will be a favorable impression that they have created, and that will help build confidence. But this is, again, where can we travel is going to be dependent on the global routes. But from the point of view that I personally think those that will take trips are not necessarily going to take long trips.
Right.
So be it the local tourism or domestic or regional, this is going to be those sorts of trips that are anywhere between 2 and 6 hours, way before the international and the long haul trips will be booked.
Okay.
Barring obviously those that will decide to return home, but I'm talking more specifically as it relates to tourism and hotel stays. It's going to be predominantly within a certain radius of travel. Now, markets like Saudi Arabia, they can benefit and should, in my view, promote and take advantage of their domestic market. They have beautiful cities and neighborhoods in Saudi Arabia, and they have been looking to further develop them. And they could benefit potentially more than, say, a place like Qatar, which predominantly relies on the corporate segment specifically, and 90% of visitation to Qatar is the international travel market.
Right.
And then if we look at the UAE, obviously there is travel from within the UAE that I expect, not necessarily any corporate, but some staycations. But that's not gonna, my concern, that's not gonna be enough. Even if all of us who live in Dubai decide to stay at hotels, we will not be able to compensate for more than the 5% of how many travelers used to come and stay in Dubai, at least in the short term.
Okay. So moving away from this, what about investors? What about investors who are looking into this region, you know, prepared to put their stakes into this region? What is your message to them? Is this the time to invest in the region, or just wait and see? What is your message to the investors?
My view is that as challenging and troubling and catastrophic as it seems, as much as it is an opportunity to invest, for those that have been eyeing to invest, there are and will be, to some extent, some good opportunities. We have to keep in mind, and this is what we said 5 years ago, and again, many times when we look at the owning structure, it is quite different the way we develop and own hotels. A large portion of these hotels are developed by the government, and therefore we may not necessarily see as many distressed assets, but there will be opportunities to acquire in the UAE, but also elsewhere in the Middle East. So from an investment, and we've asked this question actually, and I was pleasantly looking at the findings that some are still looking to develop in the hospitality sector, predominantly in the budget market, which doesn't surprise me, but also in the resort market. And these are the two segments that in the last 2 years we've identified as the changing preferences of guests. When they go out as a vacation, they want to treat themselves. But when they're there on business and not staying in the room, they want something that is affordable. And this is why I said earlier on, perhaps what's happening today will allow owners, developers, but also the operators to really reassess guest preferences and design those products for the future.
Okay. So every crisis can have a silver lining. What do you think it's in this scenario, and what are the opportunities? You know, because a crisis can create opportunities as well. So what do you recommend to your viewers? You know, that where do the opportunities lie, for not just for the Middle East, but in general? How is your personal view, on this crisis that is happening? It's so unprecedented. I'm always interested to hear what are your personal views, and how are you seeing that? Will this end, what does the end look like to you, Hala, personally?
Right. And I was going to say, I mean, probably what I'm going to say is more on a personal level, not necessarily whether it's relevant to the hospitality or not. The way I see this is that this is just one other bend along the way. I mean, on personal levels, we experience a lot of traumas and a lot of challenges. And this is more from a business context and global. We are to learn something of it. And perhaps if we take the time to reflect and look at the opportunities, there may be something better out there. Even if today we are not necessarily appreciating, because also losing lives is never a good thing. And we will always feel bad about it. But eventually, there is going to be a tomorrow. The question is, what's our attitude towards tomorrow? So my view and my saying in life, it's all about attitude. I mean, I've been home for 3 months and I have been okay. It's a choice.
Yes.
It's a choice. I mean, it's not ideal that I'm home, but I've taken advantage while at home to be at home. And this is what I've always said: in every challenge, there is an opportunity. Yes, it's going to be difficult, and I'm not, again, under evaluating the impact, but there's a learning that needs to be made. My second recommendation, and this is, something I've repeated over the last 10 years, especially when it comes to investment, and this is key, and I hope this is a learning. In business, it is always going to be a return on investment that we need to evaluate. It's not a return on ego. And I've used this word before. Oftentimes we do investments because we're either emotionally excited about them or because we're driven by egos. And these are the ones that any hit along the way, it doesn't have to be something as drastic as this one. It could be a recession and we end up losing a lot because we haven't really looked at it and assessed the risks that are associated. My advice again is, I hope we now move away from speculation, emotional reactions, emotional investments, to something that is more investing into something more sustainable, really giving back to the community. I'm a strong believer that yes, businesses need to make money, but also along the way, they need to be creating value for every stakeholder. And this stakeholder is the employee, is the guest, is the board, are the different, it's the community. And I think this is something that we many of us are now actually agreeing upon.
Thank you, Hala. And on that positive note, I'm going to end this thing. So basically, what you're saying is, I think that to invest, but it should not be speculative. It should be based on research and data. I think if it doesn't have a number, it doesn't count. And you are a numbers lady. It was really a pleasure talking to you. I hope that this has provided some clarity to the viewers. And I would encourage everybody to go to HVS Middle East website. We'll post it here, that from where I believe these reports, some of them can be downloaded for free. I checked them. And I think anyone who's looking right now for some data, these reports are vital and critical to help you a little bit to assess your own business, to assess where you are in the whole scale of things. And on that note, thank you very much, Hala. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Sumaira. Stay well. Take care.